Hello, welcome to Anita the Pedagogue channel. Today we want to look at a poetry analysis of the poem Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. So for our lesson objectives, we will look at a short biography of the poet, the title, the structure of the poem, its analysis, the literary devices, the themes, and some likely examination questions. Let's begin with a biography of Wilfred Owen. He was a British poet who lived from 1893 to 1918. He is considered one of the greatest war poets in English literature. Owen was born in Oswestry, Shropshire, England, and began writing as a teenager. After leaving school, he worked as a tutor and a language teacher in France, where he developed his interest in French symbolist poets. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Owen returned to England and enlisted in the army. Owen wrote about the horrors of trench warfare, the physical and psychological effects of the conflict on soldiers, and the senseless waste of human life. Owen was killed in action in November 1918, just 1 week before the armistice that ended the war. Let's go on now and look at the title, Anthem for Doomed Youth. This title gives a heads up to the reader that the poem highlights the hopelessness and ruins the youth experience as far as war is concerned. An anthem can refer to a song often associated with patriotism or national identity. He registers his displeasure for the loss war brings to the youth in this poem. Let's look at the poem Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. What passing bells for those who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers, nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the pass, the shrill, demented pass of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shares. What candles can be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes, shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow ducks a drawing down of blinds. Let's look at the structure of this poem. The poem is typical of Shakespearean sonnets, 14 lines. The rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and G, G. It has a sober and mournful tone, and the mood of the poem is one of sadness, grief, and loss. The poem is divided into 2 stanzas, with the first stanza consisting of 8 lines, that's an octave, and the second stanza consisting of 6 lines, sestet. The first stanza, the octet, which can be divided into 2 quatrains, describes the sounds of war, and the second stanza, the sestet, which can be divided into 1 quatrain and a couplet, focuses on the mourning of those who have died, typical of Christian funeral practices. Let's now move on and look at how it's been divided. So we see the octet has been divided into 2 quatrains, and the sestet divided into a quatrain and a couplet. Let's look at the vocabulary of the poem Anthem. So, as typically known when we talk about national anthem, an important religious or patriotic song of celebration. Passing bells here implies a bell tolled after someone's death to announce the death to the world. Patter out means to speak rapidly. Orisons implies prayers, here funeral prayers. Mockeries implies ceremonies which are insults. Bugles implies small trumpets played at military funerals. Shires, English countries and countryside from which so many of the soldiers came. Candles, church candles or the candles lit in the room where a body lies in a coffin. Pallor, an unhealthy pale appearance. Pall, a cloth spread over a coffin. Drawing down of blinds, here it is the tradition of drawing the blinds in a room where a dead person lies as a sign to the world and as a mark of respect. Let's move on and look at the very first quatrain. In the first quatrain, the poet asks us what kind of funeral bells will be rung for the soldiers who died in the war. He compared the soldiers to cattle, suggesting they were treated as expendable and were slaughtered in large numbers. The only sounds accompanying their deaths are the sounds of the guns and rifles, described as monstrous and stuttering. The soldiers do not receive proper funeral rites. Instead, their prayers are hurriedly said in the chaos of battle. In the second quatrain, the poet describes the soldiers' lack of proper funeral rites. There are no mockeries or prayers for them, and no bells toll in their honor. The only mourning comes from the sounds of the shells, described as shrill and demented. The bugles that call for the soldiers to join the war effort now call for them from their home villages, described as sad shrieks. In the sextet, the poet asks us what can be done to honor the soldiers who died in the war. He suggests that no candles can be held to speed them on their way, but instead the soldiers will be remembered in the eyes of those who loved them. The holy glimmers of goodbyes will shine in the soldiers' eyes, and the pallor of girls' brows will be their pall. The soldiers' flowers will be the tenderness of patient minds, and each sunset will remind them of their person. Now let's move on to the literary devices. Alliteration. Only the stuttering rifles, rapid rattle. The repetition of the consonant sound R in rifles, rapid and rattle. Metaphor. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. So, comparing the pallor of girls' brows to their pall. Personification. Giving human attribute to inanimate objects. In this case, the shrill demented chorus of wailing shells. Shells cannot wail. Only the monstrous anger of the guns. Definitely, guns cannot be angry. Imagery. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? So this appeals to a sense of sight and hearing, the bells. Allusion. So the entire poem alludes to the First World War. Irony. The title Anthem for Doomed Youth is ironic because anthems are typically celebratory, while the poem is about the tragic loss of young lives in war. Assonance. The vowel O is repeated in no mockeries, now for them no prayers, no bell, nor bells, and only the monstrous anger of the guns. Consonance. The repetition of consonant sounds in the same line, so the sound L in the shrill, demented chorus of wailing shells. So these sound devices makes the poem melodic. That is assonance, consonance, alliteration. Enjambment. Only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can't patter out their hasty orisons. There is enjambment because this line runs onto the following line to make meaning. Rhyme. So this poem has end rhymes, and the end rhymes are cattle rattle, guns orisons, bells shells, squash shares, all pall, eyes goodbyes, minds and blinds. Rhetorical question. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? And also what candles may be held to speed them all? Simile. What passing bells for these who die as cattle, comparing the soldiers to cattle? Do comment, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's move on and look at the themes. The horrors of war. The speaker in the first octet paints a vivid picture of the battlefield. He brings to life the gruesome images of war by describing the sounds of gunfire and artillery, as the stuttering rifles, rapid rattle, and the monstrous anger of the guns. He compared the soldiers to cattle, suggesting they were treated as disposable and were slaughtered in large numbers. He also describes the physical and emotional toll that war takes on soldiers, highlighting the shrill, demented chorus of wailing shells and the pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. This shows the depression and grief fellow soldiers endure as they fight during the war. Through these images, Owen emphasizes the brutality and senselessness of war. Let's look at the theme, the loss of young life and the lack of traditional funeral rites. So another theme of the poem is the loss of young life. The speaker describes soldiers as doomed youth who have been slaughtered on the battlefield. He also emphasizes the youthfulness of the soldiers, describing them as boys and lads. By focusing on the youth of the soldiers, the speaker highlights the tragedy of their death and the waste of their potential. In addition, the lack of traditional funeral rites for soldiers is emphasized. Owen contrasts the traditional funeral rites of civilians with the lack of ceremony for soldiers who die on the battlefield. He asks what candles may be held to speed them all, and laments that soldiers do not receive the same respect and mourning as civilians. Through this theme, the speaker criticizes the dehumanization of soldiers and the lack of recognition for their sacrifices, therefore advocating for the avoidance of war and the fact that it is needless and only wastes the life of these young soldiers. Let's look at the theme, the loss of innocence. A loss of innocence occurs when young soldiers are sent to war. The longer a war lasts, the more soldiers are recruited. In most cases, young boys are recruited. The speaker describes the soldiers as boys who are stammering, blind, and deaf as they march off to the battle. These soldiers have their lives ahead of them but are too young to know what life has in store for them. The poem suggests that war robs young men of their innocence and leaves them wounded, scarred, and traumatized. Let's look at some likely examination questions. What is the main theme of the poem? What is the significance of the title, Anthem for Doomed Youth? How does Owen use imagery to convey the horrors of war? What is the tone of the poem? How does it contribute to the overall message? What is the significance of the shrill, demented cries of wailing shells? How does Owen use the contrast between the battlefield and the home front to convey his message? What is the significance of the sad shears? How does Owen use the sonnet form to convey his message? How does Owen use alliteration and assonance to convey his message? What is the significance of the pallor of girls' brows? How does Owen use the concept of doomed youth to convey his message? What is the significance of the final two lines of the poem? Do like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Until I come your way again, keep learning and be the best version of yourself.